Fab.
The line. So it just so happens that because I've just been reading your document just now, Cynthia York is giving a talk for us tomorrow night.
Yep.
We've got a kind of an event. We would normally do dinners at the Royal Society at Christmas, and anyway, so Cynthia York happens to be our keynote speaker for that. Yeah. It might be useful for you to know that she is very fond of I&I. She was our Rothschild for the data linkage and anonymization program.
Okay.
So that might be just useful for you to know. So if you're looking for some heavy hitters that might readily agree to have their names put down, she might be a good person.
She's certainly on our list, yeah.
Anyway, but just so you know that there is that connection, and it just so happens she's speaking for us tomorrow night. And the other we've got,
so emailing her soon might be quite a good thing to do.
Absolutely. And the other speaker we've got tomorrow night who might also be useful for you is Neil Lawrence. I don't know if you know. So he's DeepMind professor of machine learning here at the university.
Okay, that would be good, yeah.
And I can tell you what his, because as I was just writing his talk things, I thought I must share this with you because it will be relevant. Hold on, give me just 1 second. So his talk tomorrow is the challenges faced while deploying machine learning and how mathematical approaches might help, and it's particularly in a real world scenario. So it's kind of got your world written all over it.
Yeah, it's definitely relevant. Thanks for that, Christine. We've got quite a few people here. We've got David.
Yeah, I'm here.
We've got David Sumter as well. Not yet. Maybe we should hang on a couple of minutes. He's had quite a lot of input into everything. So, but Megan has just let me know that we need to be out of this room at 4 o'clock on the dot. We can have a new Zoom link. So when it gets to maybe 5 to 4, depending on where we are, we'll decide on what we're going to do then. But it might mean that we have to switch rooms. Does anyone else? Has anyone else got any what's the word? Constraints? Is anyone going to have to leave earlier or within the next hour or so? Just out of interest.
I have to leave at 10 to 3.
Okay.
For another meeting.
I'll probably have to leave at the end of the first hour.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a 3 o'clock meeting. So.
Okay, so we have quite a lot of first hour folk by the looks of things. So let's. That's good to know. I think the last week didn't go so. Yeah, it's good to know in advance. Anyway, all right, then I will start without delaying then, because I think, like I say, David Sumter has had a fair bit of input on this, and I'm going to share my screen. Right. So what I should say is the plan for today is for me to whiz through what we've written in the overleaf document, as so far. There includes a bunch of puzzles that we'll go over, and I might ask input from various people if they want to say anything else about those. And then it would be good to have a discussion about that, and then hear from Christy and David Abrahams, ideally, about any thoughts on those, on what we've said, and any advice. It would be nice to talk about roles, so perhaps that's something we should definitely do before the hour's up. So I'll try and we'll try and squeeze that in, and then we can have any further discussion after that first hour. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Good. Right, so hopefully you can see the document that we have. What I should say is earlier today I tried to summarize some overarching themes that have come out of the discussions, and I think I won't go over those now. I think we should look through the document and then have a discussion of those. So these are things which I've kind of come up with. They're things that it would be good to have input from the group on. Okay, so essentially we start off with saying that we live in a data society. Lots of what we do is recorded online and stored by commercial companies. So how can we ensure that the models and data and algorithms are beneficial to society as a whole? So I've said that we will focus, well, we've said that we'll focus this on human behavior and sort of give some background on the various areas where people have studied this, and the fact that essentially it's very interdisciplinary. We then, so I'm just going to minimize you guys. So we then sort of say that whilst we try to do, whilst we might be trying to do good with these models and data, sometimes that fails very badly. And this is, and essentially what we want to do in this program is to think about what we want from this process, so this mathematizing of human behavior, and how best to go about doing that. And the way that we've structured this is around key mathematical puzzles that we'd like the participants of the program to try and address. So these would be like themes that we can join around. We give this example. I think this is so we give this example about criminal sentencing, where an algorithm had been used, essentially had been shown to give disproportionately many false positives, and there's certainly people in the audience who are more expert in this case than I am. But they said that the people who developed the algorithm said there's no calibration bias, and then it links to a theorem that's been relatively recently proved with John Kleinberg as one of the authors, essentially saying it's impossible to eliminate both this calibration bias and whilst having identical false positives. And it also links to a paper by Cynthia Dork, work by Cynthia Dork, who about fairness, and that the sort of only way to achieve that is through awareness. So just kind of looking, what is it about that example that's important? So it's we're using maths, and I think of statistics within that as within mathematics to try and address a problem of social importance. There was a conflict between the goals of doing that, but that got clarified by thinking about the problem in a mathematical way, and it also gave rise to a bunch of other studies about fairness in AI systems, which is, I guess, a fairly hot topic at the moment. So there are other cases where this kind of simplification of a complicated problem has proved beneficial. I think this paragraph here, the sort of fairness through awareness paragraph, I think this, personally, I wonder whether we can tailor this a bit better, i.e. maybe something other than Schelling, perhaps. Schelling, the reason I say that is because I think that Schelling is an example of one where perhaps it's a model that was created a long time ago. It's obviously one where people were interested in sort of how society works, but since it's had lots of variants and it's been well studied since, and I think it's probably about the point where we need to step back and rethink what we're trying to achieve. So the idea is to hinge everything around these kind of puzzles, where essentially, and the initial suggestion is, we initially were thinking early careers and sort of late careers, you might say, linking people up, but the idea is to engage the people who are at the kind of forefront of the data science and the AI, who are finding these sorts of issues, to sort of team them up with really with people who are perhaps older hands at the problem solving, the mathematical approaches. So then we sorry, go on.
Maybe not make this a binary separation. I think that can be, I think it's a fluid transition.
Yeah. Right. So so then we sort of go into the puzzles. Now we've outlined far more puzzles than we realistically intend to include. I think we've captured some of the discussion we had. And I think there's certainly scope to what's the word, to reduce how many puzzles we have, perhaps to combine it together. So this first puzzle is called the underspecification puzzle, and this relates to kind of issues with model identifiability, as discussed by Oliver McLaren last week. Essentially, where you're thinking about, given a complex model and data, can you actually infer the parameters from that data? I think Richard had been involved with quite a bit of this, but is there anything? So at the moment, I just want to hear about any specific thoughts for the puzzle. If there's anything else you want to add to that, let me know.
One point comes up to me here is sensitivity analysis of actually finding which are important parameters driving models.
Yep.
Not necessarily the same as identifiability.
Yeah.
They might be identifiable, but they're not doing anything.
Yeah. So I'm just writing this down.
Can't you tell Richard to say something about this for 2 minutes?
Richard, do you want to say something?
I think if we all say something just for 2 minutes, analyze our problems, then it helps.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I can quickly say something. Obviously, you have what's written there about the basic structure of models being underdetermined. We had the talk by Oliver, and I think given some discussions we had on Slack as well, that John and Oliver were having an interesting discussion about identifying sort of a meta problem of identifying the elements of a model that actually are identifiable. So, and this I think goes it's a parallel to the point about sensitivity analysis. So about what things are making a difference. Ultimately, if something's not making a difference, it's not going to be identifiable. So you need to find structures in the models that make a difference to outcomes as things that could in theory be identified. One thing we probably ought to say is that if something isn't making a difference and it never makes a difference, then it's not really such a problem that we can't identify it. But there are many situations where something doesn't make a difference in the data that we have, but it might make a difference somewhere down the road. And that's sort of the most dangerous situation that we have. And I think one of the problems we have is knowing how to deal with that uncertainty about extrapolating to new situations, which is one of the reasons that we build mechanistic models, agent-based models that are supposed to, in some way, map onto reality rather than just being a curve-fitting exercise, to say this should have some level of reality that we can translate to new situations. And so if we're struggling to actually identify the components of that model that relate to real physical or social aspects that are important, then perhaps we need to say, well, what sort of situation would allow those elements to be identified?
Great, thanks. I don't want to take too many comments now. Perhaps because I'm aware of time, and it'd be nice to get through everything, and then so maybe jot down any thoughts that you have as we go. So the second puzzle was around accuracy and advice. So essentially, in some senses, models sometimes don't give any better predictions than humans would. David, Richard, and possibly Jess, if she's around.
Yeah, I'll say something. I think maybe this was a lot of things taken up there were very well captured by Jess in one of the first meetings we had. I don't know if I want to put you on the spot, Jess, but we were hoping we maybe get some more from you on this type of thing.
Yeah, I enjoy complaining. Today especially. Yeah, what sort of thing were you thinking of? Essentially the problem here, I think you have it reasonably well captured, is that is that sometimes, your options are so somebody asks for a piece of advice and they need it in the next 24 hours. And your options are give them something that is what you have, So you can give them that something, you can give them nothing. I think there's that later point that says ethics tells you never to do this. This is kind of because, I mean, there's a certain danger that even I am willing to acknowledge in that, like, I can make a model that will tell you essentially anything. And I have no illusion that if you asked me for something in 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever to make, or even a week to make a decision, you're probably not inspecting the innards of that model, and nor has any software engineer. So, you know, some schools of thought would say, yeah, that's just mathematically unethical. You haven't verified the thing. On the other hand, if you say nothing, then possibly the person who's asked you for an answer will just have to make something up. And possibly, or in the COVID world, what's more likely is that somebody else who also has a poorly founded model, perhaps in a completely different direction, will give an answer. So kind of how to balance those, like, ultimately, part of the conundrum here is that you'd like to say, well, common sort of reasoning and common sense will give you as good an answer, but sometimes that's not an option, I guess. This is a conundrum I find myself in a lot these days, right?
Thanks, Jess.
Can I add something briefly to that? The idea of ethics tells you never to answer. This sort of assumes that there's a binary state here. You either give an answer or you give nothing. Now, the answer you give can actually change quite a lot. And what you do with it can change quite a lot. You can just hand over a LaTeX file and say, here's my answer. You can follow through with it. You can try and engage more with the people who are going to use the answer. You can work more on how you're going to communicate that and how you might argue that this is still not a mathematically perfect answer, but nonetheless, it'll be useful given you have 24 hours until some critical deadline or something like this. I think it's important to realize that it's not a binary state. It's not that you either give an answer or you don't. There's a massive haze around that. You can give a really useful answer or a very, very unhelpful answer. And that, I think, is where ethics actually comes in, where how you actually produce and deliver and interpret and communicate that answer.
And I'd almost always rather give a more comprehensive answer with more uncertainty and more limitations listed and this sort of thing. But I'm also aware that, and again, like, I don't want to make this about the current emergency, because, man, I'm excited for when this thing eventually happens and it's past this current emergency. But I mean, no matter what I hand a committee or a person, what they're going to pass on is 3 sentences in one picture.
If you're lucky, and that's just to the next level. This is probably a fruitful area of discussion, but let's move on. And I have also thought that perhaps given, I don't know, Christy and David Abrahams, are you available beyond the first hour?
I would have preferred to avoid it, but I can be if necessary.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm just aware that if the people who are here, it'd be good to capitalize on the people who are here for discussion, but it would be good to get some feedback. Anyway, let's see how we get on.
But can I just raise one point before you move on? I mean, I think these are interesting questions, but in terms of your overall picture of what it is you're trying to do as a program, I don't quite understand what this one accuracy and advice model, how that fits into the overall program, but maybe that will emerge within time. So I just think that these are very interesting, but you need to think of the overall context.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. I hope that, can we leave that question? Because I hope that what we can do is whiz through these and then come back about the overall kind of, and look at it as a whole, because I think that we've got sort of too many puzzles and it'd be nice to kind of round them up, I think, in a bit. Sorry to cut that off. Okay, so the emergent puzzle. So I wrote about this, which was essentially suggesting that, you know, are there ways in which we can talk more generally about models, and are there ways in which, are there sort of methods that we can use to apply in more generality? I suspect that the original context of this emergence puzzle came more from something that's possibly relevant to the next two, which is essentially what Michael talked about last week, which is around the idea, which I think is around the idea of you know, how you can unpick sort of how you can unpick different mechanisms and from the sort of emergent behavior that you observe. So I think, and I think that there's a similarity between the sort of polarization puzzle that's been listed here and to some possibly the inequality one as well. Is Michael here today? Sorry, I can have a quick look here. Doesn't look like it. I think, yeah, I think the polarization puzzle essentially links to what Michael spoke about last week, which was looking at polarization and opinion dynamics, and as I said, looking at how different mechanisms affect the outcome. So the inequality segregation puzzle is along the lines of, you know, is there a simple mathematical process that sort of can be used to describe why things like inequality and segregation occur, or do you need something more complicated? Milena, do you want to contribute on this?
Oh, sure, yeah. So I mean, I think, of course, there's a lot of work done in this, and from a mathematical point of view too, but I think there are a lot of unanswered questions. So for example, even how do we define inequality? And here we can actually, you know, could be a bit crossbreeding with the fairness people, right? So there are a lot of kind of theories on justice and fairness that connect to this. And in particularly, how do we define inequality when we assume that there's some heterogeneity in the population, right? And what if this heterogeneity is in ascribed characteristics versus achieved characteristics? So for example, intelligence or you know, education versus for example, right, like skin color or you know, gender, and I think that, yeah, there's kind of a lot to be done. I think one thing that is missing here, I had a very short time to look at this, but of course, kind of well, you know, solutions to the reducing inequality, right? Like, so for example, taxation or other methods in which we can reduce the distribution of extreme distribution of, you know, income and wealth, for example.
Sorry, I was on mute. The next puzzle is the fairness puzzle. Catherine kindly sent us some text, which I just copied and pasted in, which probably will need some cutting down. I don't know if Victor or David even want to say a bit about this.
Well, maybe Catherine can. I think Catherine's
here. Oh, is she
here?
here? Okay, I didn't realize. Sorry.
Yeah, she was here a second ago. She just. Yeah.
Sure. Sorry. Yeah, I am here. Yeah. These were notes. I didn't anticipate they might be pasted right in there.
Sorry, it was just a quick thing to do, and
of course,
I'm assuming there'll be a bit of some mistakes.
I actually think that David summarized it quite well, kind of back to me. You know, these kind of different levels of fairness. You know, the practical fairness, the theoretical fairness, and then addressing the current issues that Milena actually mentioned with inequality and justice and those sort of pieces that are definitely tied into the fairness idea. So it just talks about a couple of the different cases going on, the different places where people have tried to do very good public good, had very unfair consequences for a variety of data of not considering a framework of fairness throughout the entire process, and how some people have dealt with that.
Yeah, and I mean, I just read this for the first time about 10 minutes ago, and my read of this is, I mean, some of the examples seem common to other portions of the proposal, but it's a framework. It's one of multiple frameworks for examining these things like the predictive policing algorithms.
Great, thanks very much. The utilitarian puzzle, I think this is essentially around the fact that you know, lots of, so as it says there, lots of problems are rooted in conflicting interests. So how do you kind of capture this in a faithful way? David or Victoria, maybe, do you want to say anything else? Or I guess Victoria, you've got quite a few coming up, so maybe.
Yeah, I think actually the utilitarian and the tragedy of the commons were very similar. I mean, the idea there, I was thinking about this trolley problem where a trolley is going to crash into one person or 5 people, and you can divert it onto the road, onto another track, and kill 1 person. And that kind of illustrates why that's why it's a utilitarian puzzle. It's a paradox, and those are coming up more and more again when you have like trade-offs, for example, between in the environment or development of economy in certain countries. So, and then I think that goes into the tragedy of commons. These need to be put together somehow.
Yeah, sure. I guess one thing that's distinct there, perhaps with the utilitarian one, is that you know, you're not optimizing something simple in that kind of, you know, that simple utility function kind of idea. Victoria, do you want to say something about this problem?
Yeah, so I kind of try to come from this social science perspective, and then, you know, what kind of puzzles are we kind of dealing with, and where we need maybe help from mathematicians. And of course, I mean, if we think about social good, and of course the kind of the tragedy of the commons or general public goods problems are of course at the core of many dilemmas, where it's about kind of how we create a social good for everyone, how can we make everyone participate. And of course there's a lot of public goods games out there, but often they are, however, specified for, you know, like 4, maybe 2 players. And, you know, once you kind of try to scale it up, like to the population level, or even like just like, you know, number of countries level, many more dynamics come in that kind of interfere with the kind of normal kind of games. And it has not been really properly looked into how kind of integrate the different modeling approaches, like, you know, for instance, combining with a network, you know, approach, where, you know, players are on a network, and like there are different network dynamics also underlying the public goods dynamics. So that was the idea here.
Thanks, Victoria. Do you want to, I guess, I mean, you want to say, I mean, something about the normative change puzzle as well?
Yes, so that's actually something we kind of just recently with Richard were discussing. The idea was kind of that, so I'm at the moment kind of interested in like in normative change and how, like, you know, how normative is unfolding, how it can be accelerated. And we kind of were discussing how it is different from opinion dynamics, and like, you know, how norms are different from opinion dynamics, how they may be interacting. And we kind of, you know, stumbled upon the fact that actually like there are some interesting interactions between how those play out, and, you know, how there may be some, how this might advance in strategic kind of, strategic decisions, how agents or how people engage with this. We just really kind of started looking to, actually Richard just read a paper about it, so maybe Richard can just quickly say something on this, because we have been talking about that together. Richard?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I mean, this is literally like an evening's discussion about what distinguishes a norm from an opinion, and the fact that people might not express themselves honestly in an opinion dynamics model. And you know, a few hours searching on Google Scholar pulls up a few papers on this. Majority are in sort of management science and theoretical economics journals, and they're extremely mathematical and not really focusing on specific applications or sort of easily understood contexts. But it'd be interesting to extend beyond those and see, you know, what sort of relevance they have for example, I mean, I know the one that Victoria's most interested in is sort of things like climate negotiations. So how do you establish a norm around sort of climate protection? Would countries necessarily voice their true opinions about the state of the world, or would actors voice their true opinions about the state of the world when there are social and economic penalties for expressing certain viewpoints?
Thank you very much. So then I think this is the last one, is the forecasting puzzle, which in a sense is around how if you use a model to forecast humans and how they behave, they know they're being modeled. So how do you deal with that? And also sometimes those forecasts will be used in as with COVID, as a kind of a deterrent. So they sort of interact with the system. So you know, those forecasts might not come to pass. And so what does that say about the models themselves? I don't know if anyone else would like to say anything on that. I'll take that as a no. And so we, I mean, I was looking through what needs to be in this application. We do need to say something about future directions, you know, where things will be in the next few years, and how the workshop will respond to that. We did have some initial ideas about the role of workshops, but I think these are sort of a little bit outdated now. And I think this is very much up for discussion at some point. I mean, I think broadly speaking, I think we have a general idea of having the first workshop where we bring lots of people together and to kind of help bring focus on, you know, we have the plan for the workshop, but I think by bringing people together, we can help to shape that more clearly. And similarly with the final workshop, it'll be kind of reflective, where we look at, you know, what has been done and have a review of that. And then it's kind of what are the middle two workshops. I mean, at the moment, we were wondering whether we focus them on specific puzzles. A suggestion I might have is that perhaps that we have a maths focused workshop as the second one, and then the third one can be a kind of reflection with a more interdisciplinary group, and then the fourth one can kind of be, you know, what have we done since then. I think we haven't really tackled the latter sections, but I think going back to the beginning now is it's, you know, I wanted to go through each of those sections because I wanted everyone to have a sort of broad and brief overview of the, you know, what we've talked about. So what I did today was I just tried to summarize, you know, and I think this hopefully goes towards trying to answer what David Abrahams was asking, but essentially to try and summarize the different, you know, what are the goals, summarize the goals of the meeting. And I mean, I don't think I've quite got this quite right yet, and so I'm open to comment here. But what came to me is that I think that there's two kind of different sets of goals here, right? There's the kind of I don't know, the core mission of what this program will be, which is less about the maths and more about, you know, the creating the community and you know, dealing with the ethical sides of things and, you know, evaluating that. Some of these are things that you'd kind of hope most meetings would contribute to, right? So I mean, fundamentally, we need to be creating new mathematics, and we want that mathematics to be a benefit to society. I think an important point about that is that, you know, we need a discussion about what mathematics, you know, what it means for mathematics to do good in society. We need an ongoing discussion about that with the community. You know, we need to be able to evaluate whether what we've done has done good for society. You know, obviously we want to create new collaborations between diverse researchers, and also provide training opportunities. So those are kind of I don't know, they're the less math specific things, but I think we also need a set of, you know, mathematical goals within this. And going over those, going over the puzzles, I felt that there were 4 or 5 kind of, I don't know, themes around those. So there's certainly this theme of identifiability, right? So, you know, about models, about parameters. I mean, when we had a discussion yesterday about ethics, and I don't know, one thing that came up there was the notion of what model means, and I think it made me aware that we perhaps need to be more careful about what that means, specifically when we think of either, you know, just the comparison versus an agent-based model, something like an agent-based model versus some machine learning, which, you know, is a model in its sense, versus, you know, just someone doing statistics, where, you know, where you have you know, where fundamentally there is a model for what humans are doing, which is, you know, which is coded in maths. So there's also an issue around kind of model complexity and where it's needed, and I think this kind of links in with a few of the different puzzles there. You know, when is it needed? How do you deal with it? You know, you know, what can we say in generality about models? There's a bit about mechanisms. So, you know, and that links to kind of emergent phenomena. And again, that kind of links back into this idea of, you know, what can you say about things in general? And then I put awareness, which I think here this is a little bit confusing perhaps, and needs to be sharpened up, but essentially thinking more about, you know, the specific features of modeling humans, like, you know, that they are aware that they're being modeled. And then a little bit, and then something about this kind of evaluation of how we can assess whether a model will do good. So I think there's a discussion around that, but perhaps also there is some mathematics to do around that as well. I think at this point I'm gonna stop, and perhaps, I mean, I don't know if people in the not sure if anyone wants to whether we should pass over to David and Christy for some feedback and comments, or whether people in the group want to desperately want to say something. Sorry, it's not great leadership there. Let's.
No, John, I think it's good. I think it's good to see if anyone's got any immediate response to what you've said and how you've tried to summarize the thinking. I'd be glad to hear if others have a view at this stage before we wade in.
One thing I just want to chime in on, I don't know that it's relevant to the proposal, but don't lose track of kind of explicit and intentional community building activities. I mentioned it in the chat, things like starting each workshop off with building norms, which is something you want the community and the workshop to build rather than impose from above. And we've seen, I've definitely seen things go very wrong without those kinds of norms, as well as, you know, when you've got these interdisciplinary conversations and you have potential interdisciplinary conflicts or disagreements, having protocols in place for having those conversations to make sure voices are heard and that we understand, you know, what we mean. Like, language is a big, the same words are used very differently in different disciplines. And so having frameworks that allow us to kind of lay that on the table so we can understand what one another are saying, I think is important. I don't know that that goes in the proposal, but I just want to make sure you keep that on your radar.
Actually, I think that's a very good point, Victor. And Peter Challoner will really chime with this and say that when you're having different communities, it's not even just the same words. It can be the same symbols, can mean totally different things. And you need to be very mindful of that. And yes, build that in is good.
Could I maybe also
could comment then? Because I helped run an uncertainty quantification program, and we had two groups from statistics and from applied maths. And for about the first 4 weeks, the applied mathematicians all thought that X had to be a spatial variable, and the statisticians just used it as a general variable. And it took us 4 weeks to sort out that we were talking completely different languages, just for the very simple thing of the variable X that when we wrote it on the blackboard. So you can't, I think, overestimate the importance of setting out really simple things that are just assumed in your community. And when you bring two communities together, you're assuming different things. So I would really endorse what Victor was saying.
That's a good point. Jacine, did you want to say something?
Yes. From our discussions, my impression was that the vision is sort of slightly broader even than what you write, that it would be a holistic way of integrating mathematics, social science, ethics, training ourselves to become more integrated in our research. So using ideas from different angles. And also that the social good, when we mean we want to do good, of course, doing good depends on where you are based, right? Doing good in Iran might be something very different to doing good in the UK. So but from a mathematical viewpoint, what we are interested in, so mathematically, it's just, you have an optimization function or some kind of output function or some kind of mechanism that you want to assess. And how do you assess it? And how does ethics enter? So So maybe when we say do good, maybe we have to be a little bit clearer how the ethics part comes in here about judging the outcome.
Yeah, can I chime in with that, John? I mean, I think it will be to some degree unavoidable, just to follow on that point, to some degree unavoidable that we will have to take some sort of not completely neutral ethical stance. I don't know, I mean, we can, I think, try and stand back as much as possible, but we're you know, the idea that we're going to be value neutral compared to everyone in the world, I think is somewhat optimistic. The other thing I wanted to say in response to Victor's point is that I think actually we should take that, you know, as far as we can. I think we should say that creating a community that eventually does to some degree speak the same language and that can communicate more naturally is a positive output of the program, not just a prerequisite for having decent discussions while we're in the program, but at the end we should have a group of people who see themselves as interdisciplinary researchers in this area rather than researchers in their own field who came together for a while.
Can I just ask something quickly here? I think it's important to clarify what we mean in the proposal when we say that the mathematics, and it's not clear to me at the moment when we say the mathematical part and the other stuff. I can't see where those distinctions lie in this proposal. I mean, you know, if you're making a running a model, is solving the DE part of the mathematics? Probably. Is, you know, choosing which curve to try and fit, is that part of the mathematics? Is that a choice? I mean, which data sets to put in? Where do we say the math? I mean, my opinion is that this is incredibly broad, but I don't know what the proposal wants to take and what this group wants to take as the interpretation of the mathematical bit. I think that needs to be made quite clear.
Yep. I think it's hard. I think because essentially you're right. It is so. I mean, I always take it as being meaning very broad, but I mean, yeah.
I mean, to me, who you hire is part of the mathematics.
So this was part of the focus of our first meeting, and I think, I mean, if I could perhaps badly paraphrase what Christy told us, and I hope she'll jump in tell me if I get it wrong, that we were encouraged, I think, to take it as a very broad concept of what we can contribute in terms of new mathematics. So not seeing it just as new techniques for solving particular sort of, you know, equations or setting up particular models, but seeing that we are making a broad contribution to mathematics as a field rather than just mathematical techniques.
Okay, that needs to be very clearly articulated.
Yeah, I agree. So can I give you my point of view? Yeah, I don't think you should feel constrained about making it mathematical in some sort of traditional limited sense. The Newton Institute was set up to be very broad-minded, and it's about the application of mathematical sciences in the broadest sense. It's making mathematics useful. So in that sense, I think your proposal fits that very much. We're trying to do public good with the mathematics we use, and the mathematics permeates beyond the doing of math for its own sake and interest to its ubiquity and its benefits very broadly. And society expects that of mathematics and the Institute these days as well. So we're all doing that. I think it's for you to define what your boundaries are, and you should recognize that we do have people who will look at this proposal who will judge it with a different perspective than you. So you have to sell it. So it's easy when you start thinking about how does mathematics impact on a topic or a subject or a field. If it does sit at the heart of what you're trying to do in the basic understanding, then it's relevant to the Newton Institute and it would make a program as far as I can see it. And I think this is what you're trying to do. And that's as far as you need to go in terms of justifying it, but you have to show us where the mathematics is, where you hope that that mathematics will actually allow you to focus the problems and the solutions of those. So really use it as a sort of Occam's razor to sort of throw out the complexity and find the sort of the purity and thought in the process. Can I come back to this? One other point which struck me about the sort of common good. I mean, I think it's a very, very difficult one, as you say, but I think it's easy from a mathematician's point of view when you're looking at a problem, is to say, am I doing an honest job with this problem? If someone wants to know an answer to something and I construct a model, am I making the model interesting for me because it's got lots of nice fancy mathematics and produce a good paper that no one will read outside my little domain? Or am I trying to solve a real problem for somebody else? And if that my model is full of holes, and I'll hold my hands up and say that, if the only way I can come up with an answer to your question is by an incredibly simple model, a back of an envelope model, and that's the best I can do, then say that. It's all about integrity in this. And I think it's easy if you work through and always be saying, I cut the model to fit the data or the evidence or the mathematical understanding or what have you in that process.
Christy, is there anything you'd like to add?
Sorry, ironically, I was just, I slightly ducked out there just for a minute because I got a message from Cynthia Dwork asking me to reply just immediately. I mean, she could put what she's doing tomorrow for us. But I was tuning in at the same time as doing that, and that sounded, yes, exactly along the right sort of line. So sorry, I wasn't 100%.
No problem. Sorry to be on the spot.
I'm slightly juggling two things right this second.
No problem. So I appreciate that some people may have to go in the next 10 minutes or so. I mean, David, you might do a better job of this than me, but essentially, you know, there are a number of roles that people can play in this. And David Abrahams and Christy, if I miss anything obvious, please let me know. But obviously you can be involved in the organizing committee, which would mean contributing to write the proposal and or attending and helping to organize parts of the program. We will have a scientific advisory board. So if you would like to sit on that, that would involve commenting on the application and helping to guide us, as people have been doing here, but also perhaps advise during the event on the management and the scientific direction as it goes. You could be a workshop organizer, which, excuse me, would be, you know, helping to organize one of the workshops, which would get a lot of support from the I&I as well as the organizing committee. We need a diversity lead to ensure that sort of diversity and equal opportunities taken into account throughout the process. And I also think that we were discussing this yesterday, whether we needed a specific ethics role. I think we were discussing whether it's, you know, whether by having that you sort of you remove that ethics, you know, you remove that ethics discussion when it needs to be embedded. But I think I'm initially in favor, at least, of identifying someone who would like to take on some kind of ethics lead role. Any other jobs, key jobs that I've missed?
No, I think that's broadly it. I think it would be good for you to have an ethics lead. I mean, just like a diversity lead, we're not asking everyone else to stop thinking about diversity and inclusivity in the program. It's just that someone goes around there reminding you when you're making decisions that is an important factor. So I think because ethics will play such a role in this program, I think it makes a lot of sense to think about that.
Might it make sense to bring in like an applied ethicist to do that?
Yes, if you know someone like that, that would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of having someone from outside of the, you know, outside of our mathematical goals who can help to shape the thing. That's a good suggestion.
And also, I threw out there, which I probably haven't mentioned before, there are things that we have our podcast series and things like that. And it might be very, very interesting, and it might be a valuable contribution that you make to the community more broadly if you put some podcasts out there on ethics and other related things. I mean, yours is a really, really interesting proposal. And I know that we'll be wanting to, if it gets accepted and things like that, to celebrate it and highlight what you're contributing, because it's a new take on things.
Yeah. So John, coming back to the question about people doing jobs. So that's the traditional program model of, you've got a tight organizing committee, you have an advisory or committee, etc., and the workshop organizers. But I think what you've done a great job of starting by having a large group of people who haven't immediately got an identified role, but you're all interested in this. So I think that keeping this broader group rather than just like 5 people as an organizing committee, thinking about the program will lead to some really interesting ideas and make for a very engaging program. So I think I'd like you to continue to think of being inclusive in the progress up to the proposal being submitted, and then after that how you self-organize is up to you really. But just coming back to the sort of overall shape, I think you touched on the question of, in some sense, think about the end. What do you want if you have a successful program in this? There's lots of elements that you want to get out of it, don't you? So, it's forming new communities, and we know with interdisciplinary work that we do at the Institute, it's great when you're all there on the program, but what you want is lasting, true relationships to have formed. So you want to really knock down the barriers. So it's not just to get about getting rid of the language and mathematical sort of silos, but also finding how you form in the future. So that seems to me is to be a big factor of this, that really have a new type of community who people who can speak broadly. And I think Peter Challoner, as Christy's already alluded, is very, very experienced at doing that. So it's great that he's in this group and can sort of help you, because he's worked hard to break down barriers within mathematics, not just with maths and elsewhere. And he has experience with very broad communities talking to each other. And I think that's, again, what you're trying to do here. The ethics element of this is a very interesting one. And I really think it's worth keeping that in the thinking a lot, and how you define, public good, etc., is very, very good. But yeah, so thinking about what the output would be like, how will you have changed the academic community or other people who are asking very important questions of your community? How will that have changed if in 4 years or 5 years time, after you've had a program 3 years in time, etc.? And that will be very good, as well, of course, your own questions that you posed, answering those. So I think that, and then forming that back into the shape. I'm slightly puzzled by your use of puzzle for these questions, challenges. And you must have thought hard about why you're using the word puzzle. So I'm not trying to stop using it, but if you're going to use the word puzzle, you should define it in some sense, or why it's a puzzle, or the way we read that word in this.
David, are you saying that you think a different word such as challenge would be more?
Yeah,
that
some of these didn't sound like puzzles to me. I mean, but it's the same old question that, even though we're mathematicians, we use words very, very poorly. I mean, so we've been talking about models and the million different definitions of model. We always have. And early we were starting, one of your first points was about a model versus not having a model. Well, we all have models. I don't think we could, as human beings, we have a construction of the world which doesn't have an implicit model within it. So whether it's written down by a mathematical formula or a concept in our head, it's always that way. So I would like to think about the precision and why you use the word. So Christy, yeah, my gut reaction is that puzzle is perhaps not quite the right word, but I wouldn't want to stop you doing that, because challenge or a problem are equally bad in many ways.
Yeah, and I'll add that I was not a big fan of the use of the word puzzle, only because to me it connotes something that has an element of whimsy to it and doesn't convey the gravity of what we're discussing. On the other hand, I could see how the word choice could appeal to other mathematicians who, and that was kind of how I read it, as a word choice to appeal to mathematicians who may not otherwise appreciate that work, and maybe the proposal reviewers. I don't know anything about I&I. I will also add that I've seen that word used in other contexts. So for example, in finance, when there are, I guess, what we might call paradoxes, they sometimes call them puzzles. Like they see, they'll see empirical phenomena that doesn't match up well with the theory, and they call it a puzzle. So I'm not adamantly, it doesn't appeal to me, and I don't particularly like that.
Okay, John, I'll tell you what I'm going to say here is there is hesitation about the use of the word puzzle. And do you remember what I said at the beginning? Let's put in any hostages to fortune. So my take is, if it's going to be the case that you could come across a referee who goes, this doesn't seem sufficiently heavyweight, a puzzle's just a thing that a child does, or let's not go there. Let's choose a different term, because you hear what I'm saying.
So yeah, there is an element of sort of whimsy or sort of a pastime about it rather than being hardcore. I also think there's lots of challenges in this, because we know when you're trying to come up with difficult issues, and you want to reduce it to a model that you can think about, then you come up with these reduced models, so game theory and other things. So, but they have an incredible amount of insight, or they could be seen by social scientists outside as a load of mathematicians playing games and proving theorems on things they can prove theorems on, but not getting down to the nitty-gritty. So straddling that line is also a very, very difficult one. But we know that reducing down complex issues in society so that we can tackle them is an incredibly insightful thing to do. So balancing that, but yeah, my own feeling as Christie's is that when it goes out for refereeing, that some people may find the word puzzle difficult.
So I think, John, that given we've got to reduce the number of distinct puzzles that we had anyway, it might be good to take that opportunity to sort of aggregate them into something like challenges or themes or something like that, something broader and more heavyweight, in which, for some of them at least, specific puzzles might highlight the theme that we're trying to address. I mean, we came at this is a bit path dependent, in that we came at it with initially a few of these paradoxes, which we then rephrased as puzzles to try and illustrate the points. So, but yeah, I mean, I completely agree. We don't want to be putting stuff out there that's just going to put people off for no good reason.
So, I mean, I would be keen. I mean, that's kind of what I was doing when I tried to summarize the goals, was to try and put these into sort of different themes. So, I mean, that is a discussion that would be nice to have around what are those themes, because I don't think we want more than 4 or 5, right? And are there any advances on the things I've suggested? I think when I spoke about them, I found that model complexity and mechanisms was a little bit overlapping. I think, yeah, and perhaps there could be a little bit more in the kind of awareness one. I mean, I think identifiability, at least for me, is a really important topic. But it does cross-link with the others in the sense that, if you're thinking about models that give similar results, if you had some kind of framework where you could talk about models that produce models in general, then that might give you some idea of which ones. But yeah, and that's a discussion that'd be good to have today. There are a few other things just to throw into the mix. One thing that I'd been wondering about was, should this be a 6-month program or not? But I think from this meeting, I've come out with the feeling that yes, this is a 6-month program, because I think what we're really trying to achieve is really ambitious, and I think that, like, you know, I think it will take more than 6 months to achieve it. This is not just you know, and we would need that program to kind of set things up initially. So, I mean, please let me know if you feel otherwise. A couple of the other things that have raised, I mean, we haven't really worked in networks explicitly or even really implicitly. So, I mean, I think that that is a sort of important topic, and I think thinking about how we do that. There was a mention of what companies do we involve yesterday, and I think, I mean, rather than looking at the application, just thinking about who we're inviting. I mean, we are inviting people from Google and Microsoft. I mean, that at some point we should have a discussion about, you know, I mean, yeah, what do people think about that? Or we are planning to invite people from Google and Microsoft. And also, I asked Peter Challenor if we could have a separate conversation outside of this, perhaps linked with the uncertainty quantification, and linked with, you know, connecting uncertainty quantification with what we're doing. And so it'd be good to find out if people have any availability to do that. So there's sort of too many things there to respond to, but I mean, feel free to pitch in on any of those, and if you have to go, please do, you know, feel free. Thank you so much for everyone for their time. But yeah, it'd be good to continue on for a bit if we can. So going back to
jump in.
Yeah,
so John, on the involvement of Microsoft and other organizations. Yeah. I mean, so, you know, you've touched on in the discussion summary about so many really important issues about, you know, modeling for social good, which affects modern society, the data-rich society, in which Microsoft, Google, and all these companies are making ethical decisions when they're writing their algorithms and the software. So you just have to include them. How can you not, if you want to be really having an honest job of this? You want to get them in there and get them to open up and think about the questions that they are having to face internally, and do it in a proper open scientific forum for all to see.
Is there any, I don't know, what's the word? Are there any contrasting opinions?
I have quite a strong opinion on that. I mean, I agree that we have to involve them, but I think that one of the things in this program is that we've actually been left behind, because Microsoft, Google, they all have AI research departments, and really just fired one of their researchers for just saying some basic obvious things about their algorithms. And so that's where the math community have really been lacking. And I think that argument should come up as well, that, you know, we shouldn't leave it to them. We should certainly include them. They're allowed to come along, but they're not allowed to decide all of this. And up until now, they've been deciding it. They've invented this research field, and we've, as researchers, we've fallen behind, and we have to catch them up. So I think that the INI program can be, you know, that maybe not the start. Hopefully we're already running by then, but it should be, you know, the sort of 40 meters into the 100-meter race, the top acceleration point of us kind of catching up with Microsoft and so on.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. This has been a big sort of beef of mine in recent years, that so much activity, research activity of the sort of new type is going on in these corporations, where they're not really, well, we would agonize, and the peer review would agonize about these very complex issues, and they're not. They think about it in terms of profit and driven, and then, but they will have to backtrack, because there will come a point where society will want this open discussion, and this is the right place to have it, in a forum where mathematics can help guide the answers for this. So yeah, in an ideal world, I suppose what I was saying is right. We get them at the heart of this and to be open and frank, but they probably won't do, or they will want to slap NDA agreements on everything, and make life difficult. So you have to maneuver the way in, but you definitely want to get it onto our agenda as a community and think about these questions. So in that sense, that's a good motivation for your introduction, isn't it? This is the timeliness of it, or the fact that we're 5 years behind what they're doing.
And of course, the two names that I mentioned at the top of this, John, so Cynthia Dwork was in Microsoft, and Neil Lawrence was in Amazon. So now both in, now Harvard and Cambridge. So
yeah,
seen bone on both sides of that, so that might be useful.
I just have a concern with this. Any organization or institution that sort of comes along to participate or get involved will do so for their own interests. That's how organizations run. And if they're gaining something from this, if they're sort of learning something or getting new skills or abilities or whatever that might be, then we are helping them by involving them. Now, is it the case that we are happy to help any organization or any institution that wishes to get involved? Or are there limitations on entities that we would say, no, we don't want you to be, perhaps helping set the agenda, or we don't want you to be so intimately involved that you gain quite a lot from what's being done here, and use that for whatever you're doing that perhaps we think it could be problematic.
So, I mean, I guess in a sense, that's sort of connected to the idea that, if you come up with new research, it's possible for it to be abused, right? If you come up with some new ideas and do something, it could have, broad social benefit, but it could also be abused. And I think, I don't know, I mean, I think that's a really hard, I don't know what the right approach with that kind of thing is.
It might be beyond that. They might be doing stuff that sets the agenda, or that directs us onto the things that we're doing. So they're directing the research that we do. And that's when it becomes, I think, really problematic.
That's not an uncommon thing that we experience within INI for many different things. So take, for instance, take aside the ethical side of things for a second, but giving competitive advantage. So for instance, the energy systems program, so we necessarily had a lot of the energy providers, some UK based, a lot of the French based ones as well, et cetera, coming and participating in INI activity. And there was an acceptance that people might be getting advantage from that, but it was all presented in an academic framework, and they weren't, the thing was that none of them were setting the agenda, I think is the best way, as you've said that. So long as you guys are in control of the agenda, it's not being led by them, and that everything is open, then that seems okay.
Yeah. Pick up on something Christy said.
The Newton Institute is an open institute. We believe in making sure that everything that comes out of it is in the open domain, in open access journals or accessible journals, and therefore we want to engage people. We get money from the government for us to improve the lot of society, both nationally and internationally, which includes benefit to industry. So Maurice, we can have an individual or collective attitude towards what these people are doing, but ultimately we want to have a dialogue with whoever's doing what in our society, and whether that dialogue is a difference of opinion or a difference in the way we're doing things is up to us for discussion. But I don't see that you would ever include these people and then they would come along setting the agenda. That wouldn't happen. Even if they're giving us money towards your program, they would have no influence on you, the organizers, in setting the agenda.
They can have indirect influence once you get sufficiently many from, say, one institution inside the room, that sets the conversation. That sets what most of the discussion might be about. So it might not be directly setting the agenda, the timetable, but it might be very heavily skewing what things are discussed at coffee breaks and things like this. I mean, you really can, it is quite possible for that to happen. I'm just saying that I think we should be mindful of which organizations and institutions are invited in to come along like this, and to just sort of critique whether it's an open free-for-all or whether there are some things we wish to show restraint on.
I think it would be. I think this is part of the role of ethics lead, right? This is something that should be a part of that to ensure that kind of that balance. Richard, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on what Christy said about Neil Lawrence and sorry, I've forgotten the other woman's name. Dworkin, I forgot her first name. Sorry, Anthea Dworkin. That many of the key people in this field straddle the divide anyway. You're not going to get a lot of people you would really want in the room if you say that you can't have an institutional affiliation. I mean, you know, it's now almost a cliche if you're an AI professor that you get a well-paid commercial gig on the side, but you keep your professorship as well. I don't think it's practical to certainly draw a clean line in the sand and say we have this and not this. I completely take the point that we should be mindful that the conversation doesn't get steered towards the commercial priorities of one organization or the particular problems that they're trying to solve. You know, that's their commercial orientation. But I don't think that's immediately going to happen. But I think, yeah, it's worth keeping an eye on, like, not just setting the formal agenda, but as the program goes, to make sure that, you know, rooms aren't getting dominated by one organization, or that, you know, we do have a decent spectrum across the sort of commercial representation of a particular field.
Again, I don't think you'll find that naturally happens. We have lots of organizations and companies that come in and are very involved, and as has been said, they're often scientists who straddle academia and an organization, a company, and they're thinking about these things in the same way as we are, except that they have a goal of making money out of it. But if we were to exclude these people, then you're going down a very difficult route of who do you exclude and who do you include, and then that's an ethical question, and you're imposing some narrow view of your own on this broader question. And the other thing is that they will probably be doing things which are very, very important societal questions and wanting to answer those, and we should be in the game of answering those and having an opinion which is broader than the opinion that they may have as an organization. So therefore, you have a duty to engage with these people, I believe.
And so, also remember, can I just follow exactly that, David? So remember that INI really has this open policy, and our aim is that all seminars should be streamed live and put on the archive in perpetuity. You know, excluding individuals is the opposite of what we're in the game of. Inclusivity is the way forward in our remit.
Yeah, can we bring Peter in here? So, I mean, Peter, you had the EBD program where you had lots of stakeholders in landscape decision making, and some of those are in there, they're farmers and other people with a profit motive, etc. So did you feel any of these issues and sensitivities?
Well, they're certainly there, but I think I agree you shouldn't exclude anybody, but you shouldn't let anyone drive what you're doing as well. So we had in the landscape decision program, we had from the National Farmers Union to the National Trust to Woodland Trust, and because everyone's there and it's all very open, you can sort of see people's prejudices coming out in various things, and then you can, in a sense, cope with them. So I don't think you should let commercial interest drive anything, and I think you should not be afraid of criticizing them. Just because they're in the room doesn't mean they're above criticism. And it's better probably having them in the room than not, that they are listening, and they're listening to the criticism if they get criticism. So I'm very much in favor of being open, but I'm also very much in favor of the academics being free from any influence of the fact that they're there. That should be irrelevant. They're just another participant. Just because they're very rich doesn't matter.
Thanks. I think that's a good discussion. I again, just conscious of time and so on. I mean, I'm pretty happy with what we've had today. Is there anything anyone else would like to bring up? I mean, if we had any more time for discussion, I would want to try and kind of identify these themes. But is there anything else anybody else would like to talk about?
One thing I thought might be worth saying. I mean, there's a danger that this is going to sound perhaps patronizing, which I don't want it to sound. I think it's worth remembering as we have a continued discussion that the proposal isn't the program. So the proposal is to say, you know, what we're interested in addressing and what we're interested in spending our time, like 6 months actually working on, rather than working out the problems in the proposal, so to speak. So, I mean, the very fact that this sort of discussion leads to many interesting discussions is in part what the program is supposed to achieve, rather than the purporting to have the answers to the questions that we're actually putting forward.
Anything else anyone wants to raise?
And it's a fine line, Richard, because you have to show that you have enough of an idea of what you want to do so that the referees don't say, it feels like they don't actually know what they're going to do. But on the other hand, you don't want to have it so it feels like they've already done that, you know, so you're completely right. I absolutely agree with you, but you need to frame your questions tightly. And equally say, and it's open-ended and we don't know where it's going to go. So it's a real, there's some nuancing to go on there.
Also, a very well constructed program really helps, proposal really helps the program get off in the right direction and with the right slope, if you see what I mean. I think I've seen that over the years, and I'm sure Christy has in far more detail than I have. But as long, you don't have to answer the question, as you say, but if you construct it in a way which gives you that wiggle room but sets the priorities, then it really helps the thing get off the ground rapidly, and to be well understood by the administrative staff in terms of what you're trying to achieve. And then of course there's lots of flexibility when it goes for you know, filling it out, changing directions, etc.
My one slight concern I had is that, you know, it is so broad, and perhaps we end up with so many different communities that we would like to be involved, is that we sort of have to cherry pick people on the list for those involved. And I don't know, you know, I don't know quite how to, I mean, obviously the workshops allow us to have more people, but yeah, I can almost envisage some criticism against that, where someone says, why haven't you invited such and such and such? And it's because, well, we need all these different people in the room. We need representations from all these different areas in the room.
Yeah, so one thing Christy and I explain to people when they're putting the proposal together, and then when they're running it, is if you have a number of themes which may be quite diverse, then you think about overlapping communities throughout. So you have a sort of program of activities through the 6 months, which changes its shape and form. So, you know, you blend the different communities that you think will fit together, and then you may at the end have quite a different community and feel of what you're trying to address than the earlier community. And when you do that, you naturally see where the workshops fit well and how they punctuate and aid the thinking. But I think Christy probably, you would agree that you do need to sharpen down the communities and stuff, so you don't completely have a free-for-all. It has to have some distinct groups that you're bringing there, and it might mean that some get left out a bit in the process. But with 6 months, you can be quite adventurous, can't you, Christy?
Absolutely, and there's a welcoming within SSC of novelty and adventure and trying something new and pushing the boundaries, and so don't be frightened of that.
Yeah, I think that things have changed very rapidly in the last few years, and I think SSC will be much more responsive to this than maybe 5 or 8 years ago they would have done.
I also think that perhaps lockdown has helped us quite a lot in that, you know, I mean, I fully understand that the INI wants people on site, but I guess the idea that we could include a wider community virtually, interactively, not just in the workshops, but also in the kind of day-to-day running, I think is something we can sort of push, you know, in a believable way, right? We're doing it, so.
Yes, but John, you need to convince us that that wider community is actually going to engage, because the level of engagement, IDP has been absolutely wonderful, but it's been hard to have people in the room, as it were, in the same way that you do for a 6 month, you know, so people aren't taking sabbaticals and therefore they're carrying on and doing their other things. So you be mindful that if somebody's actually saying they're going to be there virtually, that they actually are there virtually.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks.
Can I say something about that? Because there was one discussion we had about the sort of big name people who fly in and fly out again very quickly, which always happens at these meetings, and they say yes. We were thinking of trying to make it very clear that those big name people could be involved in an online thing, and then we focus on getting really good quality people who want to really engage in this for the longer term thing. So we sort of try and make that very clear from the start that there will be these people. But maybe that's how this conversation started, and I missed it because I had to go out and deal with the. But that was something that came up. Does that sound? Do you understand what I'm saying there? And does that sound reasonable in the INI's objective?
Christy, do you want to answer?
I was just going to say yes, and we're trying to get better. We're really, I mean, literally 2 days ago or yesterday, maybe, we were having conversations exactly about improving our technology. I mean, our technology is pretty up there anyway, but really improving it to make it so that it feels as though you have the person in the room, not just in the seminar room, but how we can make it so that we bring that person into the coffee break afterwards. And so, you know, maybe there's an equivalent kind of thing to the poster sessions where you go up and you look at the poster, where you go up and you have a cup of coffee with the person who's just given the talk, who's, you know, in LA or wherever it is, do you know?
But I mean, David, we've thought long and hard over the years about making sure that we get the superstars who will draw lots of people in, as long as in the building for as long as possible, or now virtually engaged as long as possible. So that's why we have the Kirk and the Rothschild fellowships, to try and give them a minimum 28 days in when they visit. Then we've got Simon's fellowships and all of those. But I think you're urging participants to engage for longer periods than shorter, and especially if they're engaging virtually. If you set out a sort of period when they're going to be very relevant to their research to engage for that period, then that will be very good. So programs aren't about dipping, mixing and matching. It's really about immersion for a minimum period of, you know, so that they can get maximum out of it and everyone else can benefit from their presence. So I think by the time your program runs, if it's successful, we'll be probably quite experienced at doing this by then, I imagine.
Is it? I mean, I can understand that we want to say something kind of specific about the role of the workshop, but I mean, is there a preference for laying down, you know, this workshop will be about such and such, or the idea that we have this kind of, you know, first, last, you know, first set the agenda, last summarize, and then, you know, I mean, is that appropriate, or would you recommend that we were more specific, or just go with what's right for the program? I think I've answered it there, haven't I? So, but yeah, go on.
Christy, I'm not sure I understood what you were saying there, but maybe Christy did more than I did.
Say again.
I was just thinking about there's a section where we have to address the role of the workshops, and I was wondering if there's a sort of preference for being specific about, you know, for the workshops being specifically linked to a topic or a subject versus being more kind of open about what the workshops actually address, but perhaps having a kind of clear structure. If that makes sense.
You need to tell a story.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, there has to be, this is why we're doing what we're doing. It makes sense within the framework of the program. So it could be the case that we're starting off with A and then naturally moving into B and then C, and it could be that we slope, we've got mostly this community and then we're mostly going up, so we're shifting in which communities we've got. So we see it in as many different shapes as there are proposals come in, but they all have to tell a story. There has to be a coherent logic as to why you're doing what you're doing. For what you're doing, where you've got different people who want to engage, I would say that putting in summer school or things like that, activity, tutorial activity, getting people on the same page, as Peter was saying, was so important. At the beginning of at least one workshop, that's going to be a really key thing to do.
Yeah. So just let's think about it. You've gone through a number of puzzles or whatever you're going to eventually call them. One or two of those could form the natural topic for a workshop. In the weeks leading up to that workshop, you should be building up the community of people who are going to be engaged on the program rather than just on the workshop for that. You may then, as Christy said, the week before have a summer school where you bring in some people who are expert in this area on both, say, the social science side or the ethics side or some branch of mathematics to give some lectures. And the summer schools are really good because they're addressed notionally for early career researchers, but they're really for everyone else in these different groups to break down barriers, to get more discussion going at a level where everyone can understand. And by the end of that week, you've got this community. Then the workshop brings in a load more participants. They all give talks, and those talks are geared to raising a number of issues or topics. And then by the end of that, the ones who remain carrying on the program have got all this new thought and they've got a new contacts, papers, and then they self-organize into the reading groups and everything, which carry on. And then gradually that carries on, and then it starts the same thing for the next workshop, etc.
Thanks, that makes sense. So I think, I mean, I don't want to keep anyone longer than they need, than we need. However, so perhaps I'd say, does anyone want to ask any, David and Christy, any more questions now? If not, let's say thank you, David and Christy, for your input. I'm sure we will be in touch again for actually, I do have one more question and I nearly forgot it. Christy, and this is quite an important one. Christy, you suggested on the Tuesday last week that there was some ambiguity as to the submission at the end of January. Is there any clarification on that? When would there likely be clarification on that? Just to set our expectations as to what we need to get done by when. I mean, we will aim for January, but perhaps we can do things better if we know that.
I thought we were going for January, John. That's
we are. But I mean,
we're going for it. If you take it or not, there'll be something in January. That's
well, all right. So maybe, David, you think we shouldn't ask this question? That we should just do it?
No, I think you shouldn't. Well, I don't know. I was against asking this question. I thought there's a sort of momentum now, and if you stay now that we're going to do it for June, I'm just going to switch off my computer and then
let's not. Don't tell. All right, yeah.
So we will accept a submission from you at the end of January, and I think it's good. You have, I mean, it's a good distance ahead, a month and a half for you to get that proposal together, and certainly you will be ahead of anyone else who comes along, apart from one or two others in the system at the moment. But anyone coming after, we will make sure. And I don't know, Christy probably mentioned, we do have a backlog of programs because of postponements due to the pandemic. But we're hoping that we will have extra parallel programs going on to clear that as soon as we can. But the moment that's the situation. So
Okay, no, great. That's good. And thank you, David Sumter, for jumping in there. And
that's the right
I really
attitude,
agree with David Sumter, because I think you've got momentum now, and so while you've got momentum, go for it.
Okay.
Because otherwise, if you decide not to, then as David says, nobody will do anything until June, and then you'll be in exactly the same place as June, and not ahead of the queue. So go for it now and be ahead of the queue.
Yeah, great. Anything else? If not, I think David Abrahams, Christy, thank you very much for joining us. Thanks for all your input. It's been really helpful. I don't know if the others want to hang on for a sec. It'd be great to.
Okay.
Can I just say, David, I've just sent you an email. Can I get you to have a look and turn around, and then it's a Cynthia related one.
Okay, I'll do that straight away. Well, thank you very much.